Every Expo player has had a moment when they fell for a ladyboy. Must be a wrong script. Every Expo player has had a moment when they got absolutely disintegrated by a single Golem push. I know, I have. Expo vs Golem is one of the most misunderstood matchups in Clash Royale. A lot of people think it's either unwinnable or that it comes down to playing perfectly for 5 minutes straight. Neither of those is true. This matchup is winnable, but only under very specific conditions. As the Expo player, you're not trying to outdamage Golem, you're not trying to spell cycle, and you're definitely not trying to defend every push perfectly. You win this matchup by managing time, elixir, and cycle speed long enough to earn one real lock, and then using solid deck principles to make sure Golem never gets to equalize. First, a quick introduction. My name is Nick. I'm a returning Clash Royale player who's been maining Expo for years, and I consistently reach Ultimate Champion with the deck every season. I want to share the framework I use to approach this matchup at a higher level. In this video, I'm not going to teach you how to play Expo. I'm assuming you already know the deck, the mechanics, and the basics. What I want to show you instead is how this matchup actually works, which cards paired with Golem change the dynamic, the most common Expo misplays, what a real lock attempt looks like, and how to recognize when you're already winning so you don't throw the game late. If you ever felt like you played this matchup well and still lost, or like you didn't know why a game slipped away, this guide is meant to give you a clear framework from start to finish. Let's start by looking at the most common cards paired with Golem and how Expo players should adjust to them. Out of 10 most popular Golem decks, 7 include Evo Baby Dragon. This card, even after the Evo cycle nerf, is still difficult to deal with as it turns the matchup into a time problem. It doesn't threaten Expo directly, but instead it makes every defense longer, allowing Golem player to keep up with Expo fast cycle. To adjust, Expo players should be aware of opponent's cycle, forcing the Evo Baby Dragon on defense, not allowing it to be placed behind the Golem. Second most popular card paired with Golem is Hero Mini P.E.K.K.A. Oftentimes, this is the main source of damage in this deck, as well as their way to punish Expo overcommitment. In order to efficiently deal with it, Expo players should be one step ahead with their micros, i.e. cycle cards placement, denying its high single target damage. Another common card is Evo Valkyrie. On paper, it doesn't threaten Expo directly, however it is very efficient against cycle cards, oftentimes forcing an overcommitment. To deal with it properly, Expo players should make use of Knight and Tesla instead of Archers and cycle cards. Last support card that I would like to talk about is Zappies. It is an underrated card against Expo as it not only retargets it, but most importantly forces out spells with little to no value. To adjust, Expo players should be reactive with the spells, using Fireball on Zappies if and only if Expo is already on tower. Now, let's quickly look at the spells as well, as this is where most Expo players misread the matchup. Most common one is Tornado. Despite it being efficient against smaller troops and cycle cards, it doesn't threaten Expo directly, so the adjustment here is little to none. Don't replace your defensive units in the same spots. Be one step ahead. Now, for the second most common spell, we have Vines. In terms of value, this card is the opposite of Tornado, as it is one of the most efficient responses to Expo locks and, more importantly, Archers. The best adjustment here would be pre-placing early split Archers and fast cycling back to them ASAP. Another commonly used spell is Bar Barrel. It can be efficient against Expo on its own, however with the recent deploy time nerf, it's a lot easier to catch with cycle cards. All of these cards are often used together, and most Golem decks mix several types of these pressures at once. That's why Expo doesn't win this matchup by reacting to individual cards. It wins by following a set of principles that hold no matter what variation you face. Let's talk about them. Time is win condition. You're racing elixir phases. Single elixir favors you as Golem players usually run pretty heavy support units. Double is survivable. Triple is, well, triple. Principle here would be every second you can delay a clean Golem push is valuable. Never fight stacked push. Trying to out DPS a stacked Golem push is impossible. Therefore, split pressure, pull units off, reset. Principle, don't stop the push. Dissolve it. Protect your Archers. Archers are the most important piece of the puzzle in this matchup. They're your main source of DPS against Golem, and especially against Golem supports. So your job is essentially to assure their survivability. The principle here would be if archers live, X-Bow lives. Spells are time tools. Your Fireball and Log are essentially tempo tools. Fireball should gain time while Log should enable cycles, as keep in mind this game is not about spell cycling. Principle here would be if spell doesn't buy you time, it's wasted. Tower HP is a resource. Trying to take 0 damage against Golem pushes leads to overcommitment. Elixir balance matters much more than HP. So principle here would be Elixir wins games before towers do. Devalue their spells. Heavy decks hate low value spells. Therefore, your job here is to spread units, bait early usage, and then outcycle them. Principle here is if their spell feels necessary, you are winning. Getting a real lock. Against Golem decks, spell cycle strategy, as mentioned earlier, is not optimal. You need spells for defense as it gains a lot of time for you to actually do something on offense. Principle here would be, if your X-Bow never locks, X-Bow never wins. So those are the principles that I'm following in this matchup, and honestly, majority of X-Bow players know most of them already. What is important, however, is when you can apply them, as X-Bow vs Golem is basically 3 different matchups depending on Elixir phase. If you cannot adjust to that, even correct ideas lose games. Phase-based analysis. Let's start with single Elixir. This is a phase where you try to gather information, control cycle, and making sure that Fireball always stays available. In other words, this phase is not about winning immediately, but rather preparing real lock. If you leave single Elixir without falling behind in cycle, you're doing fine. Next phase, early double. This is the most important phase where matchup is decided. In this phase, Golem players start committing, and where real lock attempts become possible. Late double phase comes next. By this phase, the game is usually leaning one way or another. If you're ahead, your job is not to do more, but not to allow equalizing. As for triple Elixir phase, there is not much to say. Switch to defense mode and apply all the principles, trying to survive. When X-Bow players lose this matchup, it's usually not because the plan is wrong, but rather because players apply right ideas at a wrong time or panic when phases are changing. That leads to a few common misplays that I want to go through. Spell cycle strategy. This is the most common way X-Bow loses this matchup. In most other games, Fireball is used offensively, cycling to it in order to actually break through. Here, on the other hand, it's a defensive cooldown tool, not a win condition. Overspending on defense. Flawless defense always looks good, yet against Golem it's losing. Taking 0 damage against Golem push is impossible no matter how hard you try, therefore overcommitment most of the times is unnecessary. Use tower HP as a resource. Forcing early lock on tower. Now, the first X-Bow lock is not supposed to win the game. That's very important to understand as even the professional players often do that mistake. When you overcommit to the first lock, Golem player can easily punish you with counterpush. Before we continue, I want to clarify what I mean by real lock. A real lock isn't only about the damage, it's about what the lock cost you and what it forced from Golem player. So let's start. Criterion 1. Asymmetry. To get an opening, you do need to apply dual lane pressure against Golem. It is essential. Criterion 2. Archer's protection. To maximize the lock potential, you do need your archers alongside it. Final criterion, Fireball availability. Fireball isn't flexible in this matchup. It's a defensive cooldown. If the lock burns it, you're just borrowing time. So, what doesn't count as a real lock? Early chip. Early single elixir damage doesn't count. It looks good, yet it doesn't change how the matchup plays out. Golem still gets to set up the same push afterwards. No fireball. A lock that costs fireball doesn't count either. If you have to burn fireball just to protect the lock, you're usually losing the exchange afterwards. Desperation. Forcing locks in triple elixir almost never works. By that point, the window has already closed and you're just hoping for mistakes. So, what does a winning lock actually look like? A real lock usually comes after a heavy golem commitment. Fireball is ready, archers are protected. Even if the lock doesn't take the tower, it forces golem into awkward, inefficient responses. This is the kind of lock that wins the game, not because of the damage, but because the matchup shifts afterwards. Once you get a lock like this, you're not trying to do more. You're trying to make sure golem never equalizes. And that's how you know the game is moving in your favor. So, how to recognize that you're actually winning? The first signal is the fireball. When it stops feeling mandatory on every defense, it signals that the game is under control. If you're able to defend without using fireball, golem is usually in trouble. Another important sign is how defensive X-bow feels. When defensive X-bow doesn't feel desperate and starts feeling efficient, buying time, forcing responses, or even getting value on its own, that's a good sign. Moreover, you want to pay attention to who starts the sequences. If the golem player is the one who places golem first every time, you're dictating the pace of the matchup. At this point you're reacting, not scrambling. Once you recognize that you're winning, your playstyle should shift. You're no longer looking for locks, nor trying to end the game faster. You're trying to reduce variance. That usually means fewer offensive X-bows, more spacing, slower cycles, and sometimes just passing. If a golem player is getting impatient, everything is going according to plan. X-bow doesn't win from brute force that golem does. It wins by managing time, elixir, getting one real lock, and then not giving anything back. If you can do that consistently, this matchup is fully playable. To end the video on a proper note, I would like to give huge thanks to my fellow creators that inspired me to start making content of my very own, SK555 and Dybala CR. That boy Bala. Truly inspirational and amazing individuals. Moreover, I would like to also shout out Royal API for all the statistics used in the video. Truly insightful database platform to enhance game state understanding and always be in trend. That's all from me. See y'all next time.